with a catch-all kind of video about things I've been watching and a couple of things I've read. Timestamps are in the description for you to skip anything you're not interested in. I will start with things I've been watching. We watched Long Story Short on Netflix, which is an animated series by the people who make BoJack Horseman, I think. I haven't watched BoJack Horseman, but my husband, I guess, had heard of this series and wanted to give it a try, so I sat with him and watched it and really enjoyed it, actually. The animation style isn't necessarily my thing, but the writing, the voice acting, you know, the overall story drew me in and made me kind of forget that I didn't love the animation, if that makes sense. It's the story of a Jewish family over multiple years. It jumps around in time. They give you title cards for what year different things are happening, and you kind of, in your mind, have to slot it all on a timeline to understand the ebb and flow of this family's experiences, things that have happened, people who have passed away. It's really human, I guess, and yet still really funny, at least to us, because I do have some Jewish family, so I could relate to some of the, I don't want to promote stereotyping people, but there are some truths to some of those. And certainly in some cases this is very exaggerated, but it is very humorous, and I enjoyed it. I think they are planning a second season of that. I don't know when it'll be out, but I'm looking forward to more. We watched the movie September 5, which was nominated, I think, for maybe just one Academy Award. It is a look at the 1972, if I'm remembering the date right, the Olympics, in which the Israeli athletes were held hostage by a terrorist group. And it's told through the lens of the ABC News team that was there to cover the Olympics, having to pivot and cover this sudden, incident, and how they are struggling to continue to cover it when back then you shared your satellite time, and they are having to hand off the satellite to CBS or NBC or whoever, and they're trying to negotiate with the other stations to keep their satellite, and they are trying to figure out how to position cameras or sneak people in to get closer for better look and get a sense of what's going on. I say people, I mean like Peter Jennings is there, and for me, it was really an interesting angle because I did originally intend to go to school for journalism. I pivoted to radio, television, film, and media studies, so I'm always interested in the way a news story is put together and presented and the angles involved, and this talked about that. They had a really interesting German woman who had joined the ABC News team and was helping translate stuff and explain the German point of view and culture and the way that they were attempting to handle the situation. And yeah, I mean, I thought it was a solid movie. I could see why, even though it was worthy of a nomination, it didn't necessarily win, because it is very of a type, similar to Spotlight and those kinds of movies, which are solid movies. They tell a good story. This was very well acted. Obviously, because the events were unfolding quickly, the movie keeps pace. But I will also say that, it's not anything innovative, aside from the angle being an interesting one. There's nothing really innovative about the way this was done. I think it's probably a very solid screenplay, and I can't remember if that's what it was nominated for, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was the nomination. But overall, I don't know. For me, I would definitely, as an Academy voter, be looking for something a little more innovative, a little more different from the typical Oscar fare. But yeah, it's still worth a watch. I think if you liked Munich and you want to see a different angle on the events from that movie, then this is the one. Maybe it's a good double header for movie night if you have enough interest and can tolerate that much of this stuff. Munich and September 5 would be a good double header. We also started watching Only Murders in the Building season 5. I think there's only a couple episodes left now in the season. This is the season in which they are investigating the death of the doorman Leonard, who died at Oliver and Loretta's wedding. There's a little bit of some mafioso underpinnings to it, but also the focus on the big bads is the kind of billionaire technocrat type. Well, social media darlings like Renee Zellweger plays, I don't remember the character's name, but I think she's supposed to be some kind of pseudo Martha Stewart meets Gwyneth Paltrow, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. But definitely Christoph Waltz is supposed to be Elon Musk-ish. So, you know, it's got all the usual humor and things like that. It started out really strong, and it seems to have kind of leveled off to starting towards the denouement, right? So, you know, it's not gonna, but yeah, it's a solid season. I think this is expected to be the last season of this show. I don't know for sure, but not loving Howard and his pet robot. That's not what I want from Howard, I think, is my problem. He's become a little bit unlikable. I mean, he wasn't always like hugely likable, but now he's actively unlikable to some extent in a way that I don't love for that character, but that's just me. Yeah, so we'll, you know, finish out that season. I think, you know, there's one this week, and next week should be the end of that. And then pretty soon we'll be watching Man on the Inside season 2. And finally, I finally did sit down and watch The Pitt. So I am a Severance darling. I love that show. And of course, like a lot of people who love Severance, come Emmy time, we were disappointed that Adam Scott did not get his flowers, that the show did not get its flowers as best drama. But I had a weekend of special diet ahead of a medical procedure that I had yesterday, and before a medical procedure, of course you sit down and watch a medical drama like The Pitt, right? And I can absolutely see why it won the awards it won. This is a very good show. I was able to sit down and binge it in a way that I have not been able to do with a lot of shows. Even if Severance came out all at once, I could not sit down and watch it all the way through. But The Pitt, I can just watch hour after hour after hour after hour. It's back in January. Hopefully it's released weekly on HBO Max, whatever they're calling it now. But because I don't want to binge it, I want to savor and enjoy it. But yeah, this is just a really interesting show. We've got a broad cast of characters. Obviously, Noah Wile's Dr. Robbie is the central figure, but there's something for everyone. There's so many interesting characters, interactions, pairings as these doctors handle various cases. Now, I don't mind blood, but the gut stuff, I can't. So I did a lot of this. My husband had watched it once through already, so he watched it with me and was able to warn me, because there's not music cues the way there are in a lot of shows that tell you, oh, look away. So you kind of have to time it. You know, if you have, again, media literacy and you have a sense of the likelihood of them cutting to something or away from something, you can pretty much guess when to look away. Probably my favorite show that I've seen in a really long time. And I'm not some medical drama kind of person. I watched ER back in the day, yes. Not all the way through. At some point I wandered off from it, and I used to watch Grey's Anatomy, but only probably the first 3 or 4 seasons, and again, I wandered off from it. So hopefully The Pitt maintains this level. That's hard to do. I've said it before, when you start at the top of your game, it's hard to sustain that, because the only way to go is down. But I have hopes that season 2, which is going to be set on July 4th, an ER on July 4th, you know that's going to be hectic, and the kinds of stuff coming in is going to be insane. I just, no notes. Great show. there are characters you're going to love and characters you're going to hate. They might not be the same as the ones I love and hate. That's part of the fun of it, I think. But yeah. And for the natural transition, I would say we've been watching The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity on Netflix, which is an anime based on a manga series. So we started the anime. Absolutely just so sweet. It's set up as a pseudo Romeo and Juliet because Rinto, if I'm remembering his name right, he goes to a boys' school that is for delinquents practically. It's for the kids who can't make it in pretty much any other school. And he has a group of friends. He's doing his best. He's just not academically inclined, maybe, or he's not motivated or something. But he's a good person. But he's really tall. He's got the bleach blonde, spiky hair and piercings and stuff. So people immediately assume the worst of him anytime they see him, even though deep down he's actually really kind and he's used to people just making assumptions about him, and he's given up trying to prove anyone wrong on that front. He's just like, whatever. I'm just going to live with the fact that people are always going to think this way of me, especially given that I go to this school and I look the way I do. Then there's a girl, Kaoru. I'm going to get these names wrong. The name in Japanese of the show is Kaoru Hana wa Rinto Saku, and so it's a play on the names of the two main characters, Rinto, the guy, and Kaoru, the girl, although I think her name might actually be something a little longer than just Kaoru. But her name basically uses the kanji for fragrant, and his uses the kanji for dignity, and that's the fragrant flower. She blooms with dignity. That's him. Anyway, his mom runs a bakery. He sometimes comes in to help after school. He meets her because she comes in to eat cake. She really loves sweets. And it turns out she goes to the neighboring, fancy girls' school, the snooty school that looks down literally on his school. So it's a Romeo and Juliet in the sense that they're divided by class and these two schools. And yet they immediately kind of form this bond, and he's trying to hide it from his friends, and she's not really trying to hide it, but her friends disapprove, obviously, of her even acknowledging the existence of this guy who goes to this terrible school. It's just very sweet. It's very true to life, I feel. And it made me want to read the manga, so I did read the first volume, which follows pretty much exactly, or I should say the anime follows it pretty much exactly, almost, shot for shot, panel for panel, word for word. It's a very faithful adaptation, the anime is, of this manga, but it is, I enjoyed the art style, the characters are all great, I love them all. So, yeah, I don't know. I can highly recommend this one. And that leaves me with the book Careless People, which I'll put a picture on. I can't remember who wrote it. It was a woman who worked at Facebook from 2011 to not entirely sure when, because by the middle of this book I was kind of skimming because it was a little bit... This book has had a lot of press, and it absolutely confirms one's fears about the way social media is interfering with politics and more interested in its bottom line than in doing good. Which, honestly, there was really no question in my mind on that anyway, but this confirms that. The author discusses the really kind of terrible conditions for women in this office who are expected to pretend like they don't have families or any other life than work, because your whole life should be work. And once she has a baby, she's told to just hide it, show that you're completely devoted to this company, blah blah blah. She's a policy person, so she wants to help create, I think, if I'm understanding her, she really was looking to help Facebook lead the way into working with governments to develop regulations, legislation that they could help kind of construct. And then that would allow them to function in all these different countries and bring the world together. A very idealist kind of thing. She comes across as naive and earnest, but I feel like the author has a vested interest in coming across as naive and earnest and the only person who is speaking the truth in this whole company and the one who's pointing out, well, you're letting Mark win whenever they're playing Settlers of Catan or whatever. I was like, you really just said that? And like, were you also letting him win? Were you, because you say you were playing the game, but you don't talk about whether or not you were also letting him win or not, So there are some questions I have about where the author was coming from, but yes, I've been in workplaces where, not to put too fine a point on it, when I had my first child, when I got pregnant with my first child, I went to HR at the company I worked for. I said, my boss is going to fire me because I'm pregnant, and they were like, oh, no, she won't. And then after I had the baby, they had originally said I'd be able to work from home, and then they were like, no, you need to come back to the office. And I was like, well, can you give me at least enough time to find childcare? Because I hadn't arranged for that because I had been told, and they were like, no, come in or resign. Now, I was young, I was scared, I was stupid. I should have just sued them straight out because on the record, I had shown that they were looking to get rid of me for having a child, which is discrimination and illegal. But honestly, I was happier being home. I think it was going to cost my entire paycheck or more to put my child in daycare just so I could go work. And as much as I enjoyed the work I did as an editor, I would rather be the person raising my child than paying somebody else to do it just so I can, make a paycheck. So that's my stance on it, but it's still a shitty situation and not something that I should have had to deal with. And I'm just saying that the author of this book, I think her name is Sarah, I can sympathize with being in that situation. And, she dealt with some harassment. I mean, yes, all these people are degenerates. They're terrible people. We've learned psychologically the people drawn to these kinds of work tend to be the worst kinds of people. And, what sucks is that we've created a society that allows them to be successful at being the worst kinds of people. But, yeah, so about the middle point of this book, after we've gone through the direction Facebook is taking, like, well, let's work with governments, and if we do what they ask, they'll let us continue to function in their countries, and then we can make more money, and if we help get the right people elected, then we can make more money. By the middle of the book, she'd made her point, and it was mostly just anecdotes to prove that, to continue to prove that. And so at that point I was skimming because it started to feel a little repetitive, and it was more like her patting herself on the back for being better than that, and also just pointing out that they're all terrible people and only interested in their own success, and I don't need more pages to tell me that. So I don't know that it's worth reading all the way through. There's probably got to be some kind of Cliff's Notes version that just bullet points everything that happened. I could definitely see this book as a kind of a mini series on some kind of streaming service covering all the different things that happened. That would be, I think, an interesting way to ingest the information, probably more interesting than reading it, which I wouldn't often say, but in this case, I think because it's so anecdotal, and then this, and then this, and then this, and these are like the different incidents that are happening and stuff, I feel like I would rather watch that than read it, if that makes sense. yeah, so those are the things I've been watching and reading recently. I am finally reading a Grady Hendrix. I am reading My Best Friend's Exorcism, because that's the one Grady Hendrix that's ever sounded interesting to me. And it's been on my want to read list for like literally years. So I finally got it from the library, and I am about 30% of the way into it. I'm really enjoying it. I think it ticks a lot of sweet spots for me, because I grew up in the like 80s. I think Grady Hendrix is a little bit older than me by a few years, but I can definitely identify with like the time period and all of the hallmarks that are being thrown at me to remind me of when we are, all the musical cues and TV shows and the TCBY and all that stuff. So I'm enjoying it. I've got, a few other books on the stack, but I did finally read the 40 books for my Goodreads challenge, so I have concluded that. I'm not gonna add more books to it. I think anything I go over is just bonus, and I will post in my tabs, whatever the posts tabs is, community or whatever that is. I will post my bingo board. I have only one square left, and that is me finishing the Iliad so I can get my classics square covered, and I have started making a 2026 bingo board. I'll share it when it's finalized. So that's where we are. If you've watched anything recently that you love, read anything recently that you love, if you watched or read any of these things, let me know in the comments. And until next time, take care.